Dr. Michael Behe, welcome to Respect Graduate School. Today, if you allow me briefly, I would like to introduce yourself. Born in Altona in 1952 in Pennsylvania, yes?
Yes, that's good.
And you grew up Harrisburg,
That's right.
Pennsylvania again. And you graduated Bishop McDavid High School. Is this a Catholic school?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
It was in 1969.
Okay. That was only boys' school, or that was the girl as well?
Well, no, it's both boys and girls.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
Mhm.
So you graduated from Drexel University,
Yes.
in Pennsylvania, in 1974.
Mhm.
You have the degree Bachelor of Science in Chemistry.
Mhm. That's right.
You finished your PhD biochemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, yes?
That's right. Mhm.
And now you are working in the Lehigh University, Bethlehem.
Right.
That's
That's correct.
very briefly. And you publish many books, but let me mention three of them, which is so important. And one is the 1996, you published Darwin's Black Box. In 2007, you published The Edge of Evolution.
Mhm.
And 2019, Darwin's Devolves, yes?
That's
Darwin's
correct,
Devolves,
yes, uh-huh.
okay. These are very important books.
Yeah,
As
like
far
to
as
think
I
so.
see. As far as I see.
I agree.
Okay, so could you please tell us very briefly, what is your intelligent design argument?
Well, the argument is that when we look at the very foundation of life, that the life is run by machinery, literally machines made out of molecules. There are motors, there are little molecular cars, molecular factories, and many of these machines, or all of the machines, require many different parts to work. And it is a signature of intelligent design, of minds, that minds can arrange different parts to work with each other to perform some job or some function. And that since we have discovered these systems at the foundation of life, then that we should not shy away from concluding that they are in fact the result of intelligent design.
Okay, very good. So you see a perfect design in the molecular level, yes?
Yeah, very, very strongly designed. They're much more sophisticated than many of our machines
Yes.
that we know are designed.
So who is this intelligent designer?
Well, that's a good question, and I am a Christian. I believe in God, and so it's natural to think that since it takes such intelligence to design these, that God is the likely designer. But in academia, I'm at the university, you have to make distinctions. You have to make sure you've got evidence for your claims. And while the machinery of the cell is clearly designed, it does not have a signature on it. So
Yes.
if somebody else, and I don't believe this, but if somebody says, well, maybe it was a space alien and they came along and designed it. Some people have said that.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they serious on that?
Seriously, they have. If they say that, then I can't point to any particular feature and say that, no, this clearly wasn't a space alien.
Yes.
So it's designed, and almost everybody will make the conclusion that, in fact, the designer was God. Well, somebody might say, well, maybe it was an angel or a demon.
Why they are avoiding to pronounce that designer is the God? Going to the alien or angel or demon? What's wrong with them?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. There's a lot of people in the world, and they have a lot of crazy ideas. And But you would have to get into more than science to argue against that. You'd have to get into philosophy and
Yes.
theology and so on.
Okay. Okay, my question, the intelligent designer, is it the God of philosopher or God of prophets?
Well, that's a good question too, and I think there's insufficient biochemical evidence to make a firm conclusion. So, if
Okay.
you mean by the God of philosopher, just the God with the characteristics that Aristotle
Yes.
and other noted philosophers throughout history have concluded, well, as long as that God can act and is, that God is very intelligent and infinitely intelligent and powerful and so on, maybe so. The God of revelation, the God
Yes.
of the prophets, well, clearly that God also acts and acts in history too.
Yes.
So I myself, I'm not a philosopher, so I wouldn't be able to distinguish based on biochemical evidence.
Yes.
But then when you go to history, when you go to
Yes.
Revelation,
But
you
considering the intention, power, and the regulation and the construction, that seems to be very close to the God of prophets, revelation.
well, perhaps so. Again, I'm
Yeah.
not a theologian or a philosopher. So I try to stick to my discipline of biochemistry.
Okay.
And so when you just look at the structure of these things, you
Yes.
see the intricate interactions of the parts, how they fit to each other, how they perform their functions.
Yes.
And that's a pretty simple. It's a pretty simple conclusion to decide that needed to be designed by somebody who knew what they wanted to do. Beyond that, again, we have our ideas, but
Yes.
that's
Excellent.
not my
Excellent.
expertise.
Okay, excellent. Okay, tell me, how could you establish the relationship between your argument with the Darwin evolution theory? Are you rejecting it, evolution,
Okay.
or are you supporting it, or are you half accepting it, half rejecting it?
Okay, that's a great question, and the answer is that no, intelligent design does not say that Darwin's theory can't account for anything. It says that it can't account for everything,
Okay.
which its proponents claim. So there are some things that Darwin's theory really does account for very well, and
What is that?
well, one thing is, say, sickle cell disease.
Okay.
Many people know that sickle cell disease is due to a mutation, a change in the hemoglobin, the blood protein,
Yes.
in people, and it can cause a disease because
Yes.
the hemoglobin will aggregate. It turns out that in people who have one mutant gene, maybe from one parent, and maybe a normal gene from another
Yes.
parent, they have some resistance to malaria,
Okay.
and they can survive malaria infections where other people who don't have that mutation would die.
Okay.
And so that's very helpful.
Yes.
But it's only one tiny change out of about 500 different components of
Yes.
hemoglobin, and it's not making anything new. So it's just a tiny change in a pre-existing system. Let me compare it to something that some people might know. Suppose you wanted your car to get better gas mileage.
Yes.
Well, if in Darwinism, a change you could make would be to say take off the doors and
Okay.
throw them away, and because the car weighed less, it would get better gas mileage. But now you don't have any doors, so it's not all that great. But in that particular circumstance, it would do better. In the same way with the sickle hemoglobin and other things that Darwin's theory can account for, oftentimes it breaks a gene or it changes it just the tiniest bit, and that does allow things to survive. What Darwin's theory can't account for is when you need a couple different changes at the same time in order to construct something.
Okay, if you consider whole system, as a system, then the Darwin cannot explain this design system.
That's right. I mentioned earlier that science has discovered that it's literally true that machines run our cells. At the very foundation of life, there are molecular machines which perform stuff. And it turns out that machines are always made of multiple components, and all the components are needed for the machine to do its work, or almost all the components are. Excuse me. So to build those, you can't just have one component at a time. You need them all.
Yes.
And that's a huge barrier to Darwin's mechanism of evolution. I've called that property irreducible complexity.
Yes.
It just means that you've got a number of different components, all of which have to be present for the machine to work. And if you take one away, it's broken. Yes. And in some of my writings, as an example of that, I've just used a mousetrap.
Yes, that's very simple but very explanatory. Go on, please.
Yeah,
tell us about that.
in a mechanical mousetrap, you've got a wooden platform, and there's a spring that is tacked onto it, and the spring has a hammer which is pulled over and kept in place until the mouse comes along, and there's a trigger here, and the trigger allows the hammer to come over. It turns out that if you don't have one of those pieces, it doesn't work. So if you wanted to explain how was that built up by a Darwinian process, how would you start? A wooden platform doesn't work, so there's no reason for natural selection to select it. And a wooden platform with a spring still doesn't work. And you have to have all the components there before you have anything to select.
Yes.
And so that's a big stumbling block to Darwin's theory.
Yes.
And it turns out that's not an exception.
Yes.
All systems in the cell are pretty much irreducibly complex.
Yes, excellent. So your opponents, they say that intelligent design argument has no basis in science.
Well,
How can you answer that?
Yeah, a lot of scientists don't have answers for this, but they just want this to go away because everybody, when you think about it for a short time, knows that this points beyond nature, that something beyond nature is responsible for these designs that we see in life. And of course, most people will conclude that the designer is God, and science thought it had gotten rid of God a while back, and a lot of scientists, not all of them, but a lot of scientists don't want to allow any intimations, any indications of intelligence or God's activity back into life. So I've been disappointed because it's rare that a scientist will actually engage the argument and actually try to come to grips with this real problem of very cooperative, irreducible complexity. But that's there's a phrase, stonewalled. They stonewall the problem. That means they just say, we can answer it. We're not going to tell you what the answer is, but we can answer it. And
in the future, probably.
Well, maybe.
They say.
They say either we will answer it in the future, or we've got answers, but we don't want to tell you what they are. Or,
yes, you still claim that your argument is a scientific argument.
Yes, I do. And here's my definition. It's based on empirical evidence. The argument for intelligent design is based on physical evidence, and the physical evidence is the structure of the machinery that's been discovered in the cell, and it's based on ordinary reasoning about how we come to a conclusion of intelligent design. And we come to a conclusion of intelligent design when we see different components which are ordered to each other in order that do something that the components by themselves can't do. Essentially, irreducible complexity.
Yes, yes.
When you see a mousetrap,
Yes.
nobody has a problem concluding that that was designed, even if
Yes.
you saw it for the first time.
Yes.
We see this in the cell all the time. And it's not a religious conclusion to say that a mousetrap was designed. It shouldn't be a religious conclusion to say that a molecular machine in the cell was designed, because we're concluding it based on the same logic and based on physical evidence.
Physical and empirical evidence.
Yeah.
That makes it scientific.
That's what I think, yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So another thing is why you have not been explained irreducible complex phenomena with the natural laws and the processes. You go to the intelligent designer.
Well, one can answer that a few ways. You can say, well, we have experience of intelligence. We see intelligence in nature. We are intelligent. We know what intelligence can do.
Yeah.
So we are explaining it based on some power that we can see what the power can do.
Yes.
The second thing is that, is that some people want to explain. Some people will say we don't know what intelligence, how that arises, or where the intelligence is.
Yeah.
But in the history of science, science has oftentimes explained phenomena with explanations whose basis they don't understand.
Yes.
And one example is gravity. When
Yes.
Isaac Newton proposed the theory of gravity, nobody knew how gravity could work. It seemed that how could two bodies that didn't even touch each other, how could they interact? And a lot of people objected that seemed like a supernatural explanation because they were acting through space. But he proposed it because that seemed to work. That's how bodies behaved. In the same way, we might not be able to explain where the intelligence came from or how it acts, but we see the effects of the intelligence in the cell, in the machinery of the cell.
Yes, excellent. Your example of the mousetrap, Kenneth Miller, he answers. He says that. Look, he says, I read it. I will read here. Ironically, Behe's own example, the mousetrap, shows what is wrong with the idea. Take away two parts, the catch and the material bar. You may not have a mousetrap, but you do have a three-part machine that makes a fully functional tie clip and paper clip. Take away the spring and you have the two parts keychain. The catch of some mousetrap could be used as a fish hook and wooden base as a paperweight.
All right.
What do you think?
Well, this is a wonderful example of how people just avoid the question. They don't want to deal with this. So what I said is that with irreducible complexity, if you take something away, the system doesn't work anymore as it did. It can't catch mice. If you take any of these parts, it doesn't matter if you can use the rest as a paperweight. Anything can be used as a paperweight.
Of course.
But the question is, how does the mousetrap get there? Or how is it constructed?
Yes.
And if you take a paperweight, how is that going to catch mice? And and doesn't. And so why would any other modification to it get you along the way to a mousetrap?
So let us talk about the Darwin evolution theory. Is a theory scientifically proven?
No, it's certainly not scientifically proven. It's interesting to think that all of the mutations that Darwin depended on, he had no idea what they were. Nobody knew about genetics when he first proposed his theory. Nobody knew about molecules when he proposed. Nobody knew that there was such a thing as DNA. And it's only been in the past, it's only been 75 years since DNA was discovered, and it was deduced that that could hold the information for life. But it's only been in the past 20 years that we've seen what mutation does to genes and have been able to track it down with something called DNA sequencing techniques. And as I write in my latest book called Darwin Devolves, interestingly, that the mutations, the changes that many Darwinists have pointed to as strong examples of what Darwinian evolution can do, now that we can track them down, turns out that the mutations break genes that were already present in the organism, and in some circumstances that could help. I start out the book with the example of a polar bear. Polar bears are supposed to be descended from brown bears, like grizzly bears. And the most helpful mutation was one that broke the polar bear's ability to transport brown pigment into its fur. So it turned it white. Well, it's great. It's helpful in the Arctic, in the snow and ice, but it's a broken gene. It's not building anything. And as I write in the book, of the top 15 or so mutations that most strongly help the polar bear adjust to its environment, about 3/4, 75% of them are ones that break genes that were already there. So I argue in the book that Darwin's mechanism does work, but overwhelmingly it does so by squandering genetic information that was there and throws it out for short-term needs. It's not building anything.
But what we see actually, Darwin's theory of evolution appear to be as immune to the criticism.
Yes, it is treated as a postulate, not as a scientific hypothesis. It's treated as an assumption that you start with, not as something you conclude from. So you can do evolutionary work, but you can never disprove Darwin's theory because that's an assumption.
Yes, that's an assumption. Yes.
But it's interesting that if you follow.
But your design argument is a kind of disprovement.
It is, but if you talk to a scientist and they say, "I will never accept design. I will keep looking until I find something else." Find how Darwin's theory explains this, then if enough scientists ignore you, then your argument has no effect on them.
They treat you as a pseudoscientist, not the scientist. Why this is the case?
Calling something pseudoscience is a good way to dismiss it without having to answer the arguments. So they say, you're bad, so go away and we don't have to deal with this anymore.
Why this is the case?
Because there is no answer, and because they want to continue with the postulate of Darwinism because they have no other explanation anybody can think of how life could have developed without intelligent input into it.
Yes,
so,
there is a strong, let me say, a kind of how can I say, the political, in a sense, power within the scientific community.
You could call it political or philosophical or whatever. People certainly do use political levers and also whatever whatever they have at hand to try and suppress any questioning of Darwin's theory and certainly any discussion of intelligent design.
Yes.
So it's not science at its best.
Okay. Okay, so the truth that has to be established by the scientific evidence should have the authority over the scientific belief and the religious belief. In a sense, what you are doing, as I see it, establishing, a truth with a scientific evidence, with the empirical evidence. So this should go to the belief or the hypothesis, even, to the scientific hypothesis.
I certainly think so. And when
Yeah.
when I was being trained as a scientist, we were told that we were supposed to follow the evidence wherever it leads, and
Yes.
let other people worry about philosophy or theology or stuff. And I always thought that was good advice, but now it seems if it points in the wrong direction, some folks don't want to follow the evidence. But yeah, I think we should subject all of our certainly scientific hypotheses to the best evidence we can get. And
Why there is some, let me say, they are not eager, or they do not want to explain such a phenomenon with reference to the deity, transcendental deity, within the scientific community?
Well, science, of course, is supposed to describe nature.
Yes.
And we have other disciplines, philosophy, theology, that deal more specifically with God and so on. So it's true. If you're dealing with some disease or trying to figure out how something works in nature, there's generally any need to talk about supernatural phenomena. But sometimes, especially when you're dealing with fundamental questions like where did the universe come from,
Yes.
or how did life arise, or what is a mind, then you can't help but brush up against philosophical questions. So why does our universe have such finely tuned properties that allow life to exist? Well, you can't just say arbitrarily, well, it must be a natural phenomenon, because you're dealing with the beginning of the universe and the overall properties of it. Same thing with life. When you see all of this, sophisticated, intelligent mechanisms in life, it does not address the question just to postulate that it must have arisen by some unthinking process. You have to look into it in more detail. So,
Okay, thank you very much. I will ask last question.
Okay.
Kenneth Miller challenges your example Bacteria Pelagium, and he's saying that no, some part is enough to do the work. We don't need to do the whole structure. But how do you answer that?
Well, that's the same thing as we talked about a minute or two ago when he talked about a mousetrap and he could take away a piece and why he could use it as a paperweight or as a tie clip. Yeah, that's true, but you can't catch mice with it. In this machine he's talking about, the bacterial flagellum is really an outboard motor that bacteria use to swim. And he says if you take away some parts, it turns out that the residual thing can be used to pump proteins, pump materials out of a cell.
Yes.
Well, great, but it doesn't act as a rotary motor anymore. It doesn't act as an outboard motor. So he's ignoring my argument. He's ignoring the description of irreducible complexity, and he's making up his own definitions, and that might confuse some people, but it does not answer the question.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My
Michael
pleasure.
Behe, Dr. Behe. It is great to talk to you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.